To quote the great Jimi Hendrix, knowledge speaks, but wisdom listens. You're listening to The Wisdom Project, a podcast that does just that. We listen.
My name is Doug Boyd, Director of the Louis B. Nunn Center for Oral History in the University of Kentucky Libraries. The Wisdom Project is a podcast that uses oral history, the recording and preservation of interviews, with the purpose of documenting individual life stories. The Nunn Center has been recording and archiving oral history since 1973. Speaking of the archive, I want to introduce you to Kopana Terry. She's the one who will be co-hosting and co-producing this podcast with me.
I'm Kopana. I'm the Oral History Archivist at the Nunn Center. The Wisdom Project will feature engaging stories from the Oral History Archive. We get to listen to these stories, and this podcast gives you a chance to listen as well.
Now, I may be biased, but I believe the recording and preservation of oral history can make this world a better place. We need more listening.
Don't worry, we won't do a long introduction every time. Unless Doug changes his mind.
Now, on to episode number 1 of The Wisdom Project. In 1952, a 23-year-old Jacqueline Bouvier, a graduate of George Washington University with a degree in French literature, met and fell in love with a young congressman, John F. Kennedy. When they were married the following year, few would realize this young couple would be at the center of a story that people would liken to Arthurian legend. More than likely, you know how the Kennedy story goes, but the reality is there's still a lot of mystery to the Kennedys' years in the White House. Well, the Nunn Center has a rare 1981 interview with Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis. The interview was conducted as part of the John Sherman Cooper Oral History Project. John Sherman Cooper was a former county judge, senator from Kentucky at the same time as a young Jack Kennedy. Cooper was also an ambassador, but Cooper and his wife, Lorraine, were close personal friends with the Kennedys.
I thought we'd begin by asking if you can recall some of your first impressions of Judge Cooper. Perhaps how you first got to know he and Mrs. Cooper, and then what some of your first impressions were.
I think I first got to know him maybe 52. I can't remember whether... I was married in 1953. I remember that we used to go to Charlie Bartlett's for dinner. Mm. And Charlie Bartlett, so I was interested in Jack, and the Coopers were sort of going out together. Mm-hmm. I mean, we'd have many pleasant evenings there, and Senator Gore was often there. So I sort of saw him and Mrs. Cooper there a lot, and that's where you became friends. We were always just about the 6 of us, maybe 8. Mm-hmm. I don't think my first impression is the same as my present impression is. You know, his wisdom, his humor, that, well, I just love, I mean, he's such a fine, fine man. And over the years, you know, in the Senate, at least with Jack, maybe, who was running around the country so much campaigning, there are not that many senators who get to be your private friends as a couple.
Right, that is...
Well, he was one of them. And he remained one. You see, Mrs. Cooper had been a friend of mine before. She used to ask me to dinner parties when I was still either in my last year in college in Washington or the year or so I worked on the newspaper. Mm-hmm. I know it was just about the same time. I mean, that we were sort of, you know, courting the same time, getting married at the same time.
Yeah, you were sharing a lot of the same experiences. Right?
Well, I mean...
The interview was conducted by a 30-year-old Terry Birtwistle. Birtwistle is one of the founders of the Nunn Center and currently the dean of University of Kentucky Libraries. And it's not because he's my boss that I say. He's a pretty incredible interviewer. He's done nearly 1,000 interviews for the Nunn Center over the past 4 decades. Now, it's pretty widely known that Jackie Kennedy was a fairly private person and wasn't doing many interviews at this time. In fact, if the focus of the interview that Birdwhistle was proposing had been on her or her time on the White House, she probably would not have agreed to have done the interview in the first place. But the focus was on her close personal friend, so she agreed. But this episode is not about the story of Jackie Kennedy or the story of John Sherman Cooper. The story is the interview itself. I had a chance to interview the interviewer about his experience interviewing Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis in 1981.
I was so intrigued by the relationship that John Sherman Cooper had with the Kennedys. After Kennedy won the election, the first people they dined with, they went to the Cooper's house for dinner, and it made Life magazine and all this stuff. So, it wasn't just a crazy idea. I mean, I knew that there was a personal relationship there. But there was nobody saying, hey, you ought to interview Jackie Kennedy, because at that time, nobody interviewed Jackie Kennedy. Right. She was working at the publishing house there in New York. She'd been married to Onassis, and he had died by that time. Mm-hmm. She was just a person that you would see in a photo in some kind of news magazine or a popular magazine walking down the streets of New York. And everybody go, oh, that's Jackie Kennedy. Knowing all that, I said, well, what if? I don't know what prompted me, really, but one day I was just sitting there, and I just typed up this letter to Jackie Kennedy. I guess I knew she was at whatever the publishing house was, I forget. Put it in the mail.
Wow.
But I sent off the letter, and I never thought much about it. And then one day, I don't know how long it was after that, who knows. And so this letter comes back, and so it's one of those things where, okay, this is the letter that says, thank you for your letter. Yeah. Mrs. Onassis appreciates being asked, but she's not going to be able to do this. So you open it up, and it's from her assistant, and it said that she would like to do the interview and to call her and make the arrangements.
So he traveled to New York City.
So I'd been to New York some to doing interviews and doing some other stuff, and I was trying to be really cool about it. And I remember I'd come back from an interview like the day before, and this was back when people couldn't get in touch with you. She didn't have my cell phone number, so I walk in, and the person at the desk told me I had a message, and he handed me this Algonquin message thing that said Jackie Onassis had called. But it was actually from Nancy Tuckerman. That's her name, because Nancy Tuckerman had called. And so I immediately go, okay, well, here we go. That's all right.
He assumed that she was canceling. So he called her back, talked to her assistant, and she wasn't canceling. It was just a minor change in the schedule. After the break, we'll go to Jackie O's house. Or apartment. This episode of The Wisdom Project is brought to you by the Special Collections Research Center in the University of Kentucky Libraries. I have the Associate Dean for Special Collections, Deirdre Skaggs, here with me to tell us, why is the Special Collections Research Center special?
Well, we have extensive manuscripts, rare books, and serials, and they are noted for the Kentuckiana and the W. Hugh Peel collections. The latter is a rich collection of early editions and manuscripts of 19th century British and American authors.
Seriously, that's pretty special. Now back to the show. So it turns out Jackie O did not cancel the interview. So I asked Terry Birdwhistle if he was starting to get nervous.
There's probably maybe a part of me that might have been hoping she was actually canceling it, because, it was going to be sort of traumatic. I tell you what was making me nervous about it was, it was something that I couldn't keep secret, so people knew I was doing it. And so my main anxiety was this was going to be an interview that people would want to listen to and see, hear. If I screwed it up, it'd be a big screw up. If somehow the recording didn't work, that'd be an even bigger screw up.
So the time comes for the interview, and Birdwhistle is faced with that question that is posed to all visitors to New York: take the subway or take a cab.
So I walked out of the hotel, and rather than catch a cab to go up to the interview, which would have made the most sense, I go to the subway and get in the subway and I think I know which stop to get out of, but it's really hot in the subway, and so I'm starting to get, kind of disheveled. And because I had hair then, and my hair was kind of getting wet. It was really hot. And then I come up out of the subway, and it's like I always do in a large city when I come out of the subway, I couldn't figure out where I was and which way to go. And so I kind of walked around, and I was starting to get kind of aggravated with myself for saying, well, why'd you do this? What, just trying to be cool or what? But anyway, I found my way to the right street, walked up to the door, and there's a doorman, of course. And I'm thinking, well, this is, he's going to tell me, no, I can't go in. Then what do I do? Again, I don't have a phone. I can't just call up there and say, I'm downstairs. So I just walk in. He opens the door, and I walk in. And somehow, I don't know if he told me or I knew that, or Nancy Tuckerman had told me, take the elevator up to the 12th floor or whatever it was. So there's this little elevator. Get in the elevator, and go up. You get off the elevator, and there's a door right across the hall from the elevator. Really tight quarters, as I recall. And knock on the door, and the door opens, and it's Jackie Kennedy Onassis opening the door, with her doorman standing right behind her going, oh gosh. But she wanted to, that's the way it was. I mean, this was a very personal thing for her. It wasn't like, a journalist coming to interview her. This was somebody coming to talk to her about her friend, John Sherman Cooper. And so it was, from the moment she opened that door, it was personal. Mm. And so she says, I introduced myself, and she says, well, come in. Probably asked me how long I'd been in New York, or what I was doing, or something like that, I don't know. But she led me into, we went through sort of a living room area, into this room off of it, which was her library, which wasn't very big at all. And it had books, all the Kennedy books all around it, and a coffee table and a couch. And so, she went in first, and she sat down on the couch, and then I had to sit on the couch beside her. It wasn't like where we, right. where we are here with, two chairs, and so I'm trying to make small talk, with Jackie Kennedy, whatever I said. I'm glad that wasn't recorded. Yeah. And then the guy working there at her house brings in iced tea and little sandwiches, and again, this is. She had a personal visitor. This is what we're gonna have. And I'm very conscious of not taking up too much of her time, or not imposing in any way, or not taking advantage in any way.
Have they given you a slot, like
No.
You have from?
No. No, it's personal.
Yeah.
See, it wasn't an appointment. It was more like a visit.
If you've ever done an oral history interview, you know that there is an awkward series of moments in the beginning. When you're trying to get set up, you want to make small talk so you don't appear rude. At the same time, you need to pick the optimal location for the interview. At the same time, get your equipment set up, which if you have a lapel microphone like Birdwhistle was using back then, you would have to hook the lapel mic up and make sure that the levels were good, all the while still appearing to be calm, cool, and collected. But with oral history, the equipment really matters, so you got to get it right. But he'd done this hundreds of times before this, so piece of cake, right?
And then at some point, it's obvious we got to get the interview started. And so you got to get all your equipment out, and get it set up. I can't remember if I was using a charger or a power battery pack or a battery, or whether I plugged it in. I don't remember plugging it in, because that meant I'd had to get on the floor. I don't remember getting on the floor and crawling around. Get the two mics, and I always told people one of the hardest thing, of the interview was putting that mic on her. And so I just had to get my hand to stop shaking to put it on, and we put it on. This wasn't anything to her. She didn't. Right. Seeing a little tape recorder didn't make any difference to her. And I put mine on, and this is where Murphy's Law kicked in. The most important interview, in some ways, I would ever do. In some ways, but so we start the interview. You've listened to the interview. I had some throwaway question, I'm sure, like, so how did you first meet John Sherman Cooper? What's your first memory of John Sherman Cooper? And she starts talking, and I was very comfortable at that time with this recorder that we're using, because you take an earpiece and then you put it up to your ear and you could actually hear what was being recorded.
All right, the second tape head.
Yeah, so that you were sure that you were getting this. Well, every interview I'd ever done, that worked, except this one. So I put the thing up to my ear, nothing. And so she's talking. And obviously I'm having a meltdown right there. Because she's talking. I'm trying to think what to do. I stop it, I rewind it, push play, listen through the earpiece, nothing. So I stop it, rewind it, take out the earpiece, hit play, and there it is. It was a short in the earpiece. Oh. Now, what are the chances?
Right.
What are the chances?
Oh, that's...
And so I hit record again, and I said, okay, we're good to go. And she goes, is it working?
I thought we...
Are you sure it's working?
Right. It's a good machine because I can monitor actually what's being recorded.
I'm thrown off balance. You know, I mean, as cool as I am, I was a little shaky at that point, probably.
Birdwhistle quickly recovered, regained his rhythm, and the resulting interview is pretty fantastic. Their friendship was so close that the Kennedys spent their first dinner out after the inauguration with the Coopers. One of the great moments of the interview was when Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis recalled this evening. Birdwhistle had done so much homework in doing his research, he even knew the weather outside that evening.
I know, to show you what good friends we were, I think I'm right in this. The first dinner party we went to after we were in the White House was at the Coopers.
Right. And that interested a lot of people, that the first dinner party would be at the home of a Republican.
Well, they were just our beloved friends. I think we'd made the date before. I think it was for I think there was some dance or something in Washington that was happening then, that was sort of an occasion that Lorraine, Mrs. Cooper, had said that sounded for, so you know, then fine. I mean, we didn't go to the dance, whatever it was, but we went there for dinner.
I think there was a snowstorm that night, wasn't there?
Oh, yes, and then I guess the Secret Service ran by with so many loads of sand and everything. You know, it was meant to be rather quiet. All the press was outside. If they were surprised, I remember thinking, well, I'm happy if they're surprised, because if it shows paying homage to Senator Cooper, good. Who's there more worthy of paying homage to?
They told many stories about John Sherman Cooper, and even though the focus of the interview was not on Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis, she revealed a lot of herself in these interviews because of her friendship and love for the Coopers. And speaking of the Coopers, John Sherman Cooper, this is somebody who clearly is worth learning more about.
When Cooper got to the Senate, even when he was in and out, people really liked him. He was a serious guy, very smart, and would vote his conscience. You know, he was a big supporter of tobacco and all the things about Kentucky, but he was also, you know, right on civil rights and right on a lot of other things.
Vietnam, I think he was.
He had the Cooper Church Amendment, trying to, you know, to bring an end to the Vietnam War, and so he was just a very serious, thoughtful guy. And of course, he'd been ambassador to India. You know, quite a guy. It's a shame that a biography has not been written about him to this point. Many people have tried.
Terry Birdwhistle's 1981 interview with Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis is online at KentuckyOralHistory.org. In its entirety, the John Sherman Cooper Project is not yet online, but as the Nunn Center director, I think we need to rethink those priorities. If the Kennedys thought John Sherman Cooper was so important, he probably is. The Wisdom Project is a podcast of the Louis B. Nunn Center for Oral History in the University of Kentucky Libraries. Check out our collections at KentuckyOralHistory.org and check out our blog at nuncenter.org. www.ccpg.org. Subscribe to the podcast via iTunes. Thanks again for listening. Stay tuned for the next episode.